Good evening. My name is Phyllis Wise, and I am the provost here at the University of Washington, and I want to welcome you all to the Fall 2008 Provost Distinguished Lecture. This is a series that we started 2 years ago because we realized that we are fortunate enough to have many distinguished speakers come to the University of Washington from other universities and other parts of the world to come and teach us and to share their knowledge with us. And what we realized is that we have some of the very finest faculty members in the world right here at the University of Washington. So we started this series, which we have one speaker in the fall and one speaker in the spring, to feature our own faculty. And believe me, it is a very, very hard choice. Over the last 2 years, we've had people speak on the area of public health, global health, in childhood development, in the environment, in international studies, and tonight we have a real treat to have two of our faculty in political science and communications to talk about the most recent election. When we decided upon them, I don't think we realized just how exciting this election would be. This is an incredible collaboration between the College of Arts and Sciences, and I really want to thank Dean Anamari Kause for working with us and, in fact, allowing us to feature a series that she originally had in mind for the College of Arts and Sciences as the Provost Distinguished Speaker, and also the UW Alumni Association, which has been an incredible partner in helping us to promote this lecture series, to make sure that you alums, people in the community, faculty, students, and staff really get to enjoy this. Tonight, I have the special privilege of introducing Tim Egan, who will introduce the speakers. Tim is himself a graduate of communications, a 1980 graduate of communications, received an honorary degree from Whitman College in the year 2000, and was inducted as an alum of historical record of communications in 2006. He is a Pulitzer Prize winner, a well-respected reporter for the New York Times, and really someone that we are all very proud is a member of our community, who will come and have a few words of his own before he introduces our speakers. Please, Tim.
Well, thank you, Provost Weiss. It's great to be here. This is the real America, Seattle, Washington, where I think the city went something like 85-15 for Barack Obama. So here in the real America, you can say this about Seattle: we picked a winner this time. You know, I'm just going to make a few brief remarks before I introduce our featured speakers tonight. You know, we heard a lot of nonsense. We heard a lot of great stuff in this campaign. The nonsense, I think, as part of it was Joe the plumber and lipstick on a pig. But I think long after we've forgotten about Joe the unlicensed plumber, whose real name of course wasn't Joe, or lipstick on a pig, we are going to remember 2008. Now, I wrote a book a few years ago on the Dust Bowl, and everyone always asked me, why didn't these people living through the 1930s know better than to get out of there? Why didn't they realize how bad things were? And I said, you never know when you're living in the middle of a historical moment, that you're in the middle of a historical moment. And I believe that 2008 is one of those times where all of us have to just slow down, think about this, pinch ourselves, you know, bookmark it in time, tell your grandkids about it, think about what this moment's going to mean, and not just because of the obvious thing that for the first time we elected an African American as our president, or that the American narrative, which is that anything is possible, is alive once again throughout the world. And you saw the reaction in the world community. It was extraordinary. I don't know how many of my friends and family members called me up in tears, just saying the pictures themselves moved them. A friend of mine called me up from Austria, and she said, a man kissed me on the bus. And I said, why? And she said, because you're American. I just want to kiss Americans again. And I'm not sure how much of that happened in the Bush era. So one of the questions we'll look at tonight is, these two great guys will examine, was this a transformational election? And, you know, as a fair and balanced journalist, I think my answer is perhaps, because I think that if you look at the exit polls, and they'll go into great detail, I'm just going to give you a couple of quick bookmarks. The people who voted this year, 22% of them self-identified themselves as liberals. 34% self-identified themselves as conservatives, and everyone else was in the middle. This is almost the exact same as 4 years ago. So you could argue from that basis that we haven't changed ideologically. But there was a huge shift in so many other areas. And just to give you a couple of quick highlights. Barack Obama lost the white vote. Now, he lost it. He did better than John Kerry did among whites, but he still lost the white vote by 9%. But what's interesting about that is the white vote as a percentage of the overall electorate was the lowest it's ever been in our history. It was 74% of the overall electorate. But remember, he still did better than Kerry in that. So you can argue on the Bradley effect, whether there in fact was a Bradley effect. If you look at Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan, where Hillary Clinton was thought to be strong and where whites would go and tell pollsters one thing and vote another way, it didn't really happen. They outperformed the polls whites did in those 3 states. But other things happened to counter the loss of the white vote. Barack Obama won the Latino vote by 2-1, the most that a Democrat has won in modern times, and up by, I believe, 12% from John Kerry. You all know about the youth vote. What's interesting about that, he won it 2-1, 66%, and it was only 18% of the electorate, only up, I believe, a percentage point from 4 years ago. But that matched the over 65 vote. So those people over 65 were only 18%. So that huge, huge advantage in the youth vote counteracted the 65 or older, which Senator Obama did lose. He won Catholics. He won urban areas, which is not unusual. I wrote a piece a few weeks ago saying Obama was going to win all 20 of the best educated cities in the United States. That's judged by the census in terms of percentage of people who have bachelor degrees or above. By the way, you know what city's at the top of that list of the most educated, if I can brag on us? Seattle, Washington sits number 1 there. But there were only 2 cities that went Republican 4 years ago, Raleigh and Lexington, and they both went for Obama this year. So he won every of the top educated cities. He won the Catholic vote, which was interesting because people said that wouldn't be in play. So to summarize, if you believe, as I sometimes do, that demographics are destiny, and you're a Republican, you have to be second-guessing your party right now. Because if you lose the young, and if you lose the Latino, which is the fastest growing ethnic percentage, and you lose cities, but you also lose the suburbs. And more interestingly, he didn't lose, but he hugely gained in the exurbs. 4 years ago, George Bush won 97 of the 100 fastest growing counties in America. Everybody's, my God, that's the future. They're all, well, these are places like Riverside County, California, way east of Los Angeles. Obama won Riverside County this year, and he won several other of these exurban areas too. So if you believe that that demographics are destiny, you have to say this map is a fascinating new map. Now, we've got 2 really terrific minds coming up here tonight, Mark Smith and David Domke. I've heard these 2 guys before. They're not only just totally fascinating, but they have the added value of being entertaining, and which is a rare combination. Many of you may have heard them last spring when they did a series of sort of a dueling banjo series, but dueling intellects series, where they went back and forth on faith and finance. And it was from that Provost Weiss came up with the idea of having them, or I guess the seed was planted, for the Provost Distinguished Lecture for the fall of 2008. Mark Smith is a professor in the departments of political science and communications and has been teaching here at the university since 1997, which was my targeted graduation rate after 8 years in school. His research focuses on conservative groups, ideas, institutions, and rhetoric in modern American politics, and he examines the connections between the elite and mass politics. Elite, that was one of the dirty words we heard in that last campaign. How dare you be smart? His most recent book, which will be available outside, and he'll be signing as well, and doing a little song and dance at the same time, was called The Right Talk, How Conservatives Transformed the Great Society into the Economic Society. It's from Princeton University Press. Our second dueling banjo tonight was a journalist before he became a professor, and I won't hold that against him. David Domke. He's been all over this election, and I actually It's great to see someone from the UW be a part of the national dialogue on politics, and David's one of these people who's crossed the line. So is Mark, for that matter, but I've been sort of rooting both these guys on from the side. David explores the concerns of how media shape our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, social relationships, and broader culture. His research suggests that in the way in which news media and societal elites interact to shape discourse about issues has considerable influence on behavior. He wrote a terrific book, The God Strategy, How Religion Became a Political Weapon in America. And I saw him do a lecture on this in the spring, and I was just blown away. It was so dead on. It really made me realize it knocked out so many of my conceptions. So I'd like to bring these two gentlemen up, and they're going to do with me rock, paper, scissors to determine whom among them goes first, or I guess, yeah, who goes first, right? Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, Mark and David.
So Mark and I have done a number of lectures together, and we like to never know who's going to go first. It just adds a bit of energy and tension to our relationship. So we're going to do rock, paper, scissors, and Tim's going to join us. Whoever gets the same rock, paper, scissors as Tim goes first. Okay?
Ready? Okay.
Ready?
Yep.
Mark?
I'm ready.
All right.
Come on. 1, 2, 3. I got it.
I'm out.
Yeah. See ya.
The evening is yours, gentlemen.
The loser's chair is here, and I will take it.
The format that we're going to have this evening is one of us will speak. This will be me first. I'll get to tell you everything you need to know. And then Mark will sit over here and interject occasionally as I go. One of the dynamics that Mark and I have enjoyed in our lectures over the years is the opportunity to stop each other and ask a question in the middle. So Mark will ask some questions as I go, as we go. Then I'll stop, and we'll switch roles, and Mark will speak, and I'll ask some questions while Mark speaks, and then we'll do question and answer with all of you. So we'll go about 20, 25 minutes, each of us speaking, with one of us interjecting at different points, and we have a sense of which either of us is going to say. And that's going to be the format for the evening, and we'll hope that you'll join in and enjoy this. Let me just say up front that Mark and I really do like each other a lot. We enjoy each other, we have great respect for each other, and so all of this is in good fun. But we are going to make two contrasting arguments this evening. Mark's going to make one that is not accurate, and I'm going to make one that is correct. I'm going to make an argument walking down one side of the street in American politics, and that side of the street is what I'd call the religion side of the street. That religion is the core driver of American presidential politics. Mark's going to make the counter argument on the other side of the street. Well, it's not a counter, but a different argument on the other side of the street that the economy or different factors matter. So let's jump into it. Let's go back. Here's my title, Religious Politics, Why the 2008 Presidential Election Might Change Everything for Everyone. And I do like to move around, so I'm not a stay-at-the-podium kind of guy, just so you know. I often teach in this room, and I teach very large classes. I will walk up and down the aisles, sit next to students. I won't do that tonight, okay? But I like to move. It keeps my energy going. I think this is a transformative election, and I want to make a couple arguments for why I think that is and why I think it matters for religion and politics in particular. All right? So let me take you back in time a little bit. Let's go back a few decades to 1979, when we had an economic crisis that was probably the greatest that we had had since the Depression until today. A great economic crisis. The nation was struggling in terms of confidence, and Jimmy Carter gave an address in July of 1979 in which he laid out in that speech that America faced a crisis of confidence, of will, and of spirit. And it was a speech that was not well received. As president, you don't say these things. And I've read hundreds of presidential addresses from Franklin Roosevelt forward, virtually every major national address from Roosevelt through 6 years of George Bush for the book that Tim mentioned. And I can tell you that this address by Carter in 79 is qualitatively different than every other one. It's different. In the aftermath of this, the public was outraged. It became known as the malaise speech, that Carter dared to suggest that America was having in a malaise period. In November of 1979, about 6 months later, more than 60 Americans were taken hostage in Iran by Islamic militants. And it seemed that we were at a tipping point. This nation was in a dangerous position. Economic crisis, our president questioning our confidence, our will, or at least wondering about it, and American hostages overseas. 9 days after 9 of those 60 hostages were taken in Iran, Ronald Reagan launched his campaign for the presidency. It was his third run for the presidency, and he had his message down squat. He was also a showman well before Bill Clinton, Barack Obama ever developed their grand shows. So to launch his campaign, Ronald Reagan rented out the ballroom at the Hilton in New York, bought time on all the national networks, and convened the largest, most expensive presidential announcement in U.S. history. And he gave a 10-minute speech, and I just want to quote you the last two paragraphs of that speech, because this is a moment in which American politics changed, okay? So here's Reagan, November 1979. This is him bringing home this speech. He says, "We who are privileged to be Americans have had a rendezvous with destiny since that moment in 1630 when John Winthrop, standing on the deck of the tiny Arbella off the coast of Massachusetts, told the little band of pilgrims, 'We shall be a city upon a hill.' The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work that we've undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, that we shall be made a story and a byword throughout the world." And he finished, "A troubled and afflicted mankind looks to us, pleading for us to keep our rendezvous with destiny, that we will uphold the principles of self-reliance, self-discipline, morality, and above all, responsible liberty for every individual, so that we will become that shining city on a hill. I believe that you and I together can keep this rendezvous with destiny." Now, many of you in the audience will know where the rendezvous with destiny language came from. That's FDR. The city on a hill language is the founding myth, though, among evangelicals in this country. The idea well before the Declaration of Independence or the Great Awakening of 1730s, this idea that America was the new Israel. Reagan taps into it with this idea. Immediately, 50 leading Christian professionals from around the country mobilize behind Reagan and say, "You're our candidate. You're our guy. We want you. We thought we wanted Carter. He's the gold standard, Southern Baptist, born-again evangelical, but we want you." They went behind Reagan. Reagan did an interview with the Washington Post in which he said, "Winthrop didn't say shining. I added that." Reagan knew what he was doing, and in the book, The God Strategy, what my co-author Kevin Coe and I do is we document what happens after this. From 1984, we have more religious language in the presidency than we've ever seen in the presidency. We have more religious linkage of policies than we've ever seen in the presidency. We have more presidential proclamations and holidays that are religious than we've ever seen in the presidency. We have more party platforms with more religious language in them than we've ever had in the history of the presidency. 1980 is a turning point. Okay? I'm not going to show you that data tonight. You're just going to have to take it on faith. Okay? Instead, I'm going to say that's what it's been. That's where we've been, and you know it. You've lived it, for good or for bad. I make no assumptions about the audience tonight. I might make a few assumptions, this being Seattle, but the reality is that people of faith are from a variety of political perspectives. So I make no assumptions about whether you think this is good or bad. I will tell you that it has troubled me because I'm concerned about democracy. And let me also say to you that I'm a person of faith myself. So it's not that I'm hostile to religion, it's that I'm concerned about democracy. Okay? That said, I bring hope tonight, not Obama's hope, but a hope that maybe we've turned another corner, this time a corner that takes us a different direction in American religious politics. So I jump now to the 2008 presidential election. You got anything?
I'm waiting patiently.
Rendezvous with destiny right here, okay? Okay? All right. What I want to suggest is we have seen a turn in the God strategy. The God strategy is what Reagan offered. We have not dissipated it, not thrown it out, but we've had a turning point in this election. Okay? So let's go to the God strategy. 3 rules of the God strategy I think can explain this election. Forget the economy, mostly. You got to go with me here, okay? Now, actually, I don't think you need to forget the economy. I think that religious politics runs secondary to the economy. I think the economy is the most important part of the electorate. But even in this grand economic moment, religious politics have mattered. There's 3 rules in the God strategy that I think can explain much of what we see in terms of an outcome of this election. And I want to offer those 3. The first is about Obama, the second is about McCain, and the third is about young voters. Okay? Rule number 1 is you have to signal early if you're a presidential candidate. This is the gist of the rule. You have to define yourself in religious terms before it comes off as a political move. You cannot wait until late in a presidential or political campaign to emphasize your faith because it will be seen as the faith card. Manipulative. Nothing more than pulling it out because you need those voters. Doug Wead, who was an advisor to both Bushes. He's still alive. He was the evangelical outreach advisor to George H.W. Bush in 1988, and then got into a scandal, so he was fired. So he wasn't around in 92. Doug Weed is going to comment on the shift from 88 to 92 in the quote I'm about to show you. This is Weed commenting from 2004 in the context of George W. Bush. So he's reflecting back on why George H.W. Bush lost in 92. Why did he lose then but win in 88? And Weed said, in 92, I was not there. Well, that's a pretty self-serving quote, right? But beyond that, right, he says, President Bush Sr. did not have someone objectively advising him on what he should do and say and how he should work with these evangelical leaders. He went directly to the leaders themselves, he did, and asked for advice. Of course, Jerry Falwell's advice was come to Liberty University, which is Falwell's university. We went on to say, so Bush flew into Liberty University the week before his election. If I'd have been there, I'd have said, yes, let's go to Liberty University 2 years before the election. But after that, no. No. Certainly not the year of the election, and certainly not the week before the election when Bush did it. Because it comes off as desperate and manipulative. Let me flip the ideological stripe and go over to the Democratic side. John Kerry, in November 2007, reflecting on why he lost. He was criticized widely for not emphasizing his Catholic faith enough. And Kerry put it in these terms. I should have started earlier to introduce who I really was. In 02 or 03, he told Newsweek last week, he gave a big Catholic values speech in Florida in October of 04, but by then it was too late. October is October, Kerry said. You've got to do this earlier, he says. People have to have a sense of this as a continuum, not as a political tool. It may be a political tool. I'm agnostic on that. I don't know. I'll never know what's inside these people's minds. I can use the very thing, religious language here too, just so you know. After you've studied this stuff, you can use it all. But the reality is you can't pull it out late in the campaign. It's too late. It comes off as manipulative. So let's look. The first point's about Barack Obama. Let's consider Barack Obama. He's written 2 books. Before he ran for the presidency, the guy wrote 2 books. As a good friend of mine said, the guy's got an ego, all right? He wrote 2 books, bestsellers too. I'm working on that. So the reality is that in both of those books, he talks about his faith. Faith is important. He's got a faith chapter in his second book. It's a very important chapter. In fact, he invited the best-known, most important evangelical in this country, Rick Warren, to read that faith chapter for the second version, to build an alliance. And in his DNC address in 2004, Barack Obama had the famous line that we worship an awesome God in the blue states. Now, that may fly right over many people's heads right here, but that is language that evangelicals understand, because one of the best-known choruses among evangelicals is Rich Mullins' song, Awesome God. That's language. You don't come up with the language of awesome God just by chance. Obama knew what he was doing. He was signaling that he was a person of Christian faith. This is back in 04. I'm not saying he was planning to run for the presidency then. Maybe he was. But he was certainly letting people know that he was a Christian or person of religious faith. Well, let's move along. 2006, he gets invited to be the keynote speaker at the Sojourners Call to Renewal Conference, a speech about religion and faith that was nuanced as Obama is. He talked about the importance of faith for Democrats, while at the same time saying that we must absolutely uphold the separation of church and state and never equivocate on that. E.J. Dionne, one of the most widely syndicated columnists in the country and someone who writes about faith and politics a great deal, called it the most important speech on religion and politics given by a Democrat since John Kennedy's address in 1960. This is Obama, 2 to 4 years before he's running for the presidency. He's not done. In 2006, he goes to Rick Warren's AIDS Summit. Rick Warren's church. Warren is the author of The Purpose-Driven Life. 25 million copies sold for that book in this country. Highest-selling nonfiction book in American history. Warren holds a big summit on AIDS every December. He invited Obama in December 06 to come speak. Obama took a lot of heat for going. Warren took a lot of heat for inviting him. Both of them stood there and said, we're going to do this. And on that day, that moment, in that place, Obama stood on the stage with Sam Brownback, a conservative Republican, and Rick Warren between the two of them. And they all raised their hands together and said, we're Christians, we work together, we have differences of opinion, but we can come together on AIDS and poverty and many other issues. And 2,000 conservative ministers at Warren's church gave Obama a standing ovation. This is all way in advance. Way in advance. Hillary Clinton went to Rick Warren's church too in December 2007. Obama went a year earlier. And then throughout 2007 and 2008, in Iowa and South Carolina, Obama ran a whole series of faith forums, what he called 40 days, the symbolism, 40 days of faith and family. throughout those states to emphasize that he's a Christian, that it was important to him. This guy's name is Barack Obama. He needed to do this. Whether you want him to or not, he needed politically to do this. I want to just show you one of the mailers that they sent out in Iowa and South Carolina about his faith. One of the great things about the University of Washington is we have wireless access all over campus. That's also one of the things we have to clamp down on students on, okay? But we can handle that. These are 3 mailers. I'm just going to show you one that they sent out to Iowa and South Carolina voters. This is about Obama. I don't believe this came to Seattle addresses, okay? Did you get it, Mark? No. These went out all over the place. This guy was running an election in which 10 to 15% of Americans thought he was Muslim. He needed to do this. 23% in Texas, the last poll showed. Okay? He signaled early and often. Why did this matter? I'll bring this point to a head right now. It mattered because he built up crucial religious capital that he desperately needed. When Reverend Jeremiah Wright hit the airwaves, and when Obama made his biggest gaffe of the campaign on Bittergate, when he said that people cling because they're bitter, they cling to religion and guns. If you had said that, and you had not done this kind of spade work on being a person of faith, you would have been in such a big hole. 10 to 15% already think you're Muslim. Another 5-10% think you're Arabic. The reality is that you're thinking that guns and religion, they go together and people are bitter about it. He would have been in deep trouble. I think he weathered those crises because of signaling early. Absolutely essential for Barack Obama's success. Point number 1, I don't think he wins this election without that kind of work. Point number 2, rule number 2 is you got to follow the golden mean. What does this mean in terms of religious politics? Well, when you use faith politically, you can't be too strident or nakedly partisan in doing so. You can't do it in such a crude way that it's obvious to the public that you're using faith politically. Quick example. In 2005, after George Bush was reelected, Bush interrupted his vacation to come back to the White House because on Easter Sunday, the Republican Congress had passed legislation to intervene in Terry Schiavo's situation in Florida. Bush interrupted a vacation. The only time he did it to pass legislation, came back to D.C. to pass this legislation. In the aftermath of that, public opinion polls showed that 3/4 of Americans thought that the Republicans had intervened in Terry Schiavo's situation for political purposes. 3/4. That's being seen as nakedly partisan, overly strident in religious politics. And it hurt them. And when Bush put the capper on that the following year by vetoing the stem cell bill, that was too much for many people. So you can't be overly partisan and be in religious politics. You've got to play it down the middle. So let me jump to this is about McCain now. This is 8 states that are Republican primary states. I'm going to show you the results in 2000 and 2008 in these 8 states. South Carolina, Virginia, Florida, Georgia, California, Missouri, Ohio, and Michigan. Why do I pick these 8 states? They're diverse across the country, and they also, all 8 of them were contested in each election. All 8 were. So the Republican nomination was still up in the air in these 8. I want to show you the percent that George Bush in 2000 and the percent that John McCain in 2008 won the base of the party, white evangelicals, by. The way you win the primaries in American politics is you win the base of the party. You have to. It's been the long rule of thumb. Barack Obama became the nominee because he won African Americans the base of the party. Didn't think that was going to happen. Hillary Clinton had that support for a long time, but then they swung to Obama. Obama became the Democratic nominee. So let's see, how did Bush crystallize white evangelicals in 2000? How much did he win in each of these primaries, the white evangelical vote in these primaries? Here's the percentage that he won them by. 40 to 75%. Bush won the base of the party in 2000. Over, by the way, who was his closest competitor? John McCain. John McCain was not a favorite of white evangelicals. You know why? Because in the middle of the election, he declared Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson to be agents of intolerance who shame our faith and shame our nation. That doesn't get you votes, usually. Okay? But in 2006, knowing he needed to get enough of these votes, instead of saying that, he went to Liberty University 2 years before to give the commencement address at Liberty. John McCain did. Trying to win enough of these votes. So how did McCain do In 2008, same states, white evangelicals, how much did he win them by, or did he lose them by? He lost them in 6 out of 8 and broke even in 2 of them. So John McCain did the unthinkable. He won the Republican nomination without the base of the party. Phenomenal, fascinating for people like Mark and I. We'll be studying this forever, but not a good political strategy, because what you have to do in the general election then is run to the base. Instead of running to the middle, you've got to win over the base. So how did John McCain win over what?
Let's pause here.
Okay.
I'm going to let you continue with the McCain point, but I want to go back momentarily to Obama.
Okay.
So you're making the case that Obama had a smart religious strategy, and you've argued on other occasions that, including here, that John Kerry's religious strategy was flawed and that he was too quiet about his faith,
Yeah.
and Kerry even said so in your quote. And I'm following the logic of how Obama's strategy was better. But one thing we do as social scientists is, all right, the logic makes sense. Can we have some concrete proof, some evidence that shows that indeed the logic carries out?
Okay.
So you're familiar with the Pew Research Center.
I am.
Use their data all the time. Their data shows, if you compare 2004 to 2008, Kerry election versus the Obama election, so Obama's 5 points better overall.
Right.
So overall he's 5 points better, but his single best group religiously is the unaffiliated. He gains 8 points relative to Kerry among the unaffiliated.
Right.
That's his best group. So whatever his strategy is, it's actually appealing even more to the unaffiliated, which is about 15% or so of the electorate, and is a growing part of the electorate.
Right.
Those claim they're unaffiliated with any religion.
Right.
So it seems to me that whatever he did, it doesn't really show up in the data, and that if anything, he's growing among unaffiliated voters rather than the religiously inclined.
Okay, great. This is point 2, that you can't be nakedly partisan when you play religious politics. George Bush also increased his vote share among the unaffiliated by a substantial portion from 2000 to 2004, even though he was clearly religious in the eyes of many Americans. So what you've got to do is that Bush did not run an openly, nakedly partisan religious politics endeavor when he ran for the presidency. It's troubled many people in this room after he won the presidency, but not in the campaign. So a good religious politics strategy wins you both the religious voters because you signal to them in the way they hear it, but not in a way that you push off. The awesome God language didn't offend many unaffiliated religious folks. They're like, whatever, okay? Okay? But it meant a lot to evangelicals, right? So the good strategy threads the needle and gets both those camps. And we see that in 92, in 96 when Clinton runs for election. We see it in 2004 for George Bush, that they get not only more religious voters, they get more unaffiliated too. It's across the board.
All right, I'll think about that point, but,
Okay.
but concede it for now.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Man, when he started pulling out data, did you see me start to sweat? You can't pull out more data, although I got some later. So McCain wins the vote. He wins the primary without evangelicals. How'd he do it? One of the things I like to do with PowerPoint is come up with a little gee whiz stuff. So here's one of them. Doom, doom, doom. Okay? This is how McCain won the primary vote. One state, South Carolina. When the South Carolina primary was created in 1980, it was hand in hand with the new religious politics of the Republican Party. They wanted the evangelical base of the South to have an important role and voice in the primary system. Since 1980, nobody's become the Republican nominee without winning South Carolina's primary. Nobody. So when we get to South Carolina in the Republican primary, John McCain, Mitt Romney, and Mike Huckabee have all won a primary caucus. This is going to carry the day. It's going to be crucial. It's going to break the tie. McCain won it by 3 points. Fred Thompson drops out the next day. Thompson got 15% of the vote, heavily evangelical. If Thompson had dropped out beforehand, that vote would have gone to Huckabee. Huckabee would have been the nominee. So McCain wins it on the skin of his teeth, one state. But it makes a problem. You got to run to the middle. You got to run to the base. So he has the middle, but he doesn't have the base. He needs something to help him with the base. Something. What's it going to be? Okay? What's going to help him with the base? You got any ideas, Mark? Nothing? You got any data on that? All right?
I'm working on it.
Okay. Here we go. Sarah Palin, right? There's long been a draft Palin movement among evangelicals. They love her. Pro-life, shoots guns, this kind of stuff. It's great. So McCain nominates her, but here's the great risk. The great risk is that it's late in the election. It could easily be seen as just nothing more than a nakedly partisan religious move because he needs the base. So his great fear is that she will become seen as not substantive. That's the great risk that McCain has in naming her the vice presidential nominee. So I want to show you one more poll data on this point. What was your reasons for choosing the running mate? This is a question that the public was asked in the middle of September, not October, not down the road, but in the middle of September, after mostly the launch and a little bit of interviews for Palin. What were the reasons that the candidates chose their running mates? Two possible options: the candidate's well qualified, or the person's going to help him win the election, Obama or Biden. It's a New York Times CBS poll. Got this one in there for you, Tim, for the New York Times. So Obama picking Biden or McCain picking Palin, was the candidate, the VP, well qualified, or was that person a political choice? Help him win the election. For Obama and Biden, 2/3 say that Biden's going to be well qualified. Sure, some people say going to help him win the election, but 2-1 basically qualified. What about for Palin? And we know that this carries through to the election day, that on election day, 60% of Americans say Sarah Palin not qualified to be president. That's of that group, 60% say that she's not qualified to be president. Only 9% of Democrats say she's qualified, and only 33% of independents say it. So Sarah Palin won the base but lost the rest. That's what she did. She won the base but lost the rest. That doesn't win American politics. It's not how you do it. You have to win the base in the primary and then run to the middle. That's the second rule of the God strategy. Third rule, bringing it home. Mind the youth. I will later tell you a story about some of our UW students and the roles they played in this campaign. But let me just say now that the youth played very important roles in determining this election outcome. Show you just a couple pieces of data that speak to this and then bring it home in religious politics terms. Here's the rule, that younger voters are the canaries in the coal mine of American religious politics. That when younger voters begin to deviate from the rest of the electorate, do something different, they fall over, or they begin to do something else that's different from the rest of the electorate, you got to pay attention. Just like the canary in the coal mine. They're an early indicator of something. They need to be paid attention to. So let's see what they did in 2008 that's different or notable. Let's look at three groups in the Democratic primaries. Three groups that played a key role. I want to show you the percent of the electorate that they had, and then the percent of increase over 2004. African Americans, Latinos, and 18 to 29-year-olds. Obviously, 18 to 29-year-olds have overlap with the first two groups, but also include a significant number of whites, Asian Americans, and Native Americans, and so on. So what percent of the Democratic primary electorate were African Americans? 22% of the Democratic primary electorate was African Americans in 2008. What was the increase over 2004 on that? Was about an 8% increase. They were already a large chunk. So they increased, but they were already large. What about Latinos? What percent of the electorate were they? They were only 8%. But what was the increase relative to 2004? Latinos go way up. Now we know these two groups are fighting back and forth. The African American vote swung behind Obama. The Latino vote was strong behind Clinton. So what about 18 to 29-year-olds? Where were they? Maybe they could be the crucial decider. Well, they're about 12, 13% of the electorate in the Democratic primaries. Well, what's the increase over 2004? Okay, over 50% increase of people under the age of 30 in the Democratic primaries. And they went overwhelmingly for Obama. I think they are the crucial vote deciders in the primaries. So then the point becomes, do they stay? Do they come out? What happens in the general? Last slide. The Democratic nominee vote. The percent of the vote that the Democratic nominee gets across all these elections, 80 to 2008. I want to show you the percent that the Democratic nominee gets for the whole electorate and the percent that they get for 18 to 29-year-olds, and see whether they move together. Are those percentages similar? Do they move together? Let's see. 18 to 29-year-olds get a little bit more for the Democratic nominee fairly consistently, but they move together very, very much so. So that they go apart by a couple points but come back together. That's through 2000. That's through 2000. But what about the last two elections? Do they move with the electorate or do they move different than the electorate? They give Barack Obama a significant cushion in this election. Much greater. He wins by 6 points. over John McCain. But among 18 to 29-year-olds, Barack Obama wins by 34 points. A 14-point gap between the popular vote and the percentage that went to Obama. Enormous. So one last bit of this slide is this last bit. 3 points, and I close with this, about that youth vote. 3 things I want to say. First of all, 18 to 29-year-olds were the only portion of the white electorate that voted in a majority for Barack Obama in this country. The rest of the white electorate nationally under 50, most of them under 40. Obama gets more than 50% of the white electorate among the 18 to 29-year-olds. I think we need to reflect on that. Second, among that vote population right there, Barack Obama doubles his support among white evangelicals, from Kerry. 16% for Kerry among 18 to 29-year-olds. Barack Obama gets 32% of white evangelicals. Largest number that any Democrat's got in a long time among white evangelicals. The base of the Republican Party. Third point, last point. We talk about John Kennedy's 1960 as this grand transcendent moment for youth in which Kennedy stamped it with the passing of the torch in his inaugural address. The percentage of victory that Obama had among 18 to 29-year-olds under 30 voters is 4 times larger than John Kennedy had. 4 times larger. When you're a Republican in this country, you look at 2 factors right now that scare the bejesus out of you. The first is you looked at Latinos who are trending Republican, went strongly Democratic, and they're the largest part of the growing part of the electorate. And second, they have lost the 18 to 29-year-old vote in significant ways in the last 2 elections. If demographics are determinative, those are not good trends. But at the same time, the religious dynamics of this campaign seem to be crossing and intersecting here. That's what I came to say tonight. Thank you.
So I'm going to tonight give a different perspective than David gave. It's going to be in tension in some places. For example, I'm going to challenge his claim that Palin won the base and lost everyone else. And in general, that particular events of the campaign were themselves decisive. So we'll get there. I want to thank you all for joining us. Many of you were with us for our Faith and Finance series that we did in the spring. Others joining us for the first time tonight. And there was a large demand for this event, so much so that we have an overflow room next door. And we're being projected on a screen over there as I speak. And I want to recognize you all. And we're separated by only this thin barrier. You know, if President Reagan were here, he might say, "Provost-wise, tear down this wall." So I'm going to begin my talk tonight with a metaphor. Some cards. There may be some poker players in the audience. I've been known to play poker on occasion. In fact, I played with David some years ago. As I recall, I walked away with some of your money.
You did.
And I think that the image of poker, or cards more generally, is an appropriate one in understanding the campaign. And that for any card game, there are certain cards you're dealt, and then there's a matter of playing the cards that you have. The cards that you're dealt are completely outside of your control. Once you have the cards, then the skill comes in playing. So I'm going to argue that there's 2 things going on in any presidential campaign, and I'll apply it to 2008. Namely, there are some factors outside the control of the candidates that are really true for any generic Republican or any generic Democrat who'd be on the ballot. So strip away John McCain and his background, strip away Barack Obama and his background, stick up any Democrat, any Republican. Those things are outside of the control of the candidates. Then, so that's the cards. Then there's the matter of how you play your cards. You might have a disadvantage. Maybe your cards aren't as strong, but if you play them effectively, you can prevail in difficult circumstances. So that's the how you play the cards part. Both of those matter. But I have set this up to kind of structure it the way I think that things work out, which is the cards that you've been dealt are the more important part of that. So I have up here from Texas Hold'em the best possible starting hand. It's known as pocket aces. Generally, when you have pocket aces, you win. Now, I've been at poker tables with guys who'll sit down and they think that if they have pocket aces, they're automatically entitled to the pot. Well, no, you still have to play them well, and there are instances where you fold them. But if you start off with a big advantage, you will normally win. So we'll see how that plays out in this election. So let's take a look at the cards as of July 1st. What are the cards that were dealt to each candidate? Now remember, this is before the general election campaign really kicks into high gear. So many of the people in this room were engaged in the campaign at that point. David and I were obsessed with it. But for most Americans, they're not fully engaged yet. It's not until September comes along, October, the conventions, the debates, where they get fully engaged. So this is before the campaign is really fully underway. And these are factors outside the control of the candidates at that point. Well, if you're John McCain, you're aware of this fact. The sitting president is a member of your party. He has an approval rating of 30%. That's not very good. In American history, there's been only a couple of instances where presidents got as low as 30. One of them was Harry Truman in the middle of his troubles. The second was Richard Nixon when he got driven out of office because of Watergate. That's not a good history to draw on. If you're John McCain looking at that, you say, I don't like those cards at all. So you're stuck by being the same party as a hugely unpopular president. How about U.S. economic conditions as of July 1st? Now remember, this is long before the financial meltdown, or not long before, but 3 months before. Was it the case that the economy was doing pretty well, and then all of a sudden Lehman Brothers collapses and your 401k becomes a 401A or something else? No, the economy was in bad shape back in July. If you ask Americans as of July 1st, would you rate U.S. economic conditions, and there's several categories. The top 2 categories are excellent or good, and I've combined them. The top 2 categories get a total of only 15% saying the U.S. economic conditions are excellent or good. 52% say poor, a large majority. So back in July, it's a bad economy. People perceived it that way. When you're the incumbent party running under a bad economy, that does not bode well for your prospects of winning. So that's some more bad cards that are placed in John McCain's hand, which of course at the flip side is good cards placed in Barack Obama's hand. Let's take a look at party identification. This data is from March 20th, just because I couldn't quite find something exactly on July 1st, but these numbers don't change a whole lot over time, so these data will suffice for our purposes. So party identification is when you ask people, generally speaking, which party do you consider yourself to affiliate with? 36% say Democrat, 27% say Republican, 37% say independent. You can do math as well as I can. That's a 9 percentage point advantage for Democrats. Now you might look at that and say, well, 9%, hey, what's 9% among friends? Well, in electoral terms, a lot. If the final vote reflects those patterns and Obama maintains the 9-point lead, that's a landslide election. 9 points in presidential terms is a landslide. That's roughly the magnitude by which Ronald Reagan beat Jimmy Carter in 1980. So if Obama can hold the Democrats and win any reasonable slice of the independents, he wins. And by the way, the independents, that 27%, or 37%, I'm sorry, is actually misleading because the number of true independents is about 10% of the electorate. If you ask people, do you consider yourself a Republican, Democrat, or independent, a lot of people say, oh, I'm an independent. You know, I'm not a party man, I'm not a party woman, I vote for the best candidate. Oh, okay, great. So then you ask a follow-up question, well, do you lean toward the Democrats or the Republicans? Turns out about 2/3 of the people will crack at that point and say, yeah, I lean to the Democrats or I lean to the Republicans. So you got about 10% who will stick with it through thick and thin. No, I told you I'm independent, I'm still an independent. About 2/3 will crack. If you compare the people who will crack on that second question and you compare their voting over time to people who just say flat out, okay, yeah, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat the first time. And then usually there's a follow-up question, are you a strong Democrat, a regular Democrat, or a weak Democrat? The people who are independents and say they lean Democrat vote over time for Democrats at just the same rates as people who are regular Democrats and weak Democrats. So in other words, about 2/3 of the independent pool are not really independents. They say they are because we're in a country where I don't want to be a party person, I vote for the best candidate. What a coincidence, the best candidate always seems to be a Democrat or a Republican. But hey, I didn't plan it that way. So those numbers are actually better for Obama than it appears. McCain, in order to reverse this, needs to not just hold all the Republicans, he needs to win a lot of independents, and that's going to be really hard to do because a lot of the independents really aren't independents, they're Democrats. So more bad cards for John McCain's hand, which means more good cards for Barack Obama's hand. And remember, this is all before the campaign really kicks into high gear. This is before you started seeing 30-second spots on television. Of course, in Washington, we didn't see that many because we're not a battleground state. But if you were following the campaign, this is before the ads really kick in and before the conventions, before anybody knew who Sarah Palin is outside of the state of Alaska, et cetera. So this is all long before they've really honed their messages and the general election season has been fully engaged. Political scientists have developed a number of forecasting models to predict presidential elections. And there's some scholars who do this, sometimes working alone, other times in groups. And there's a variety of these models, but generally speaking, they use variables to try to predict the election that are of the kind I just showed you. So things like the state of the economy, the approval rating of the current president, the partisan distribution of the electorate. Occasionally, they'll bring in other things like, is the country in a state of war? Is a party seeking a third term? And the models vary from scholar to scholar. But in all of them, there's kind of a core set of variables. And in all of them, the state of the economy is generally the strongest predictor of the election outcomes. So there's this group of scholars, and every 4 years, they kind of compile their data. And remember, this is all data from before the general election season. So before the campaign has really been fully engaged. And then they release their results. Turns out that this year, as they do generally every 4 years, they present their results at the annual meeting of the American Political Science Association, which comes over Labor Day weekend, so end of August, beginning of September. So they're using data from pretty much over the summer. And the average forecast gave Barack Obama 53.3% of the two-party vote. Now, I mentioned there were several different models, so this is the average among the models. Some of the models gave him higher than that, some of them gave him lower than that, but the average among the 9 sticks him at 53.3%. That number ought to look very familiar. Now, that's the percentage of the two-party vote, so this is throwing away third-party candidates. As of right now, Barack Obama, with ballots that are still being counted, has 52.7% of the total vote, but if you take the two-party vote, which is what these models are trying to forecast, he has 53.4% of the total vote. So they're correct. The average of the models is correct down to the first decimal place. Now remember, this is the average of the models, and some of them are higher than that, some of them are lower than that. But I think when a bunch of scholars study this thing, it's a bit like the stock market, and then if a bunch of people are betting the price of the stock or investing that it will go up, and others are investing that it will go down, that means it kind of stabilizes. If more people start investing that it will go up, then the price starts rising. So this is essentially kind of like a market price, if you will, for political scientists who are making forecasts of the election. So they nailed it almost exactly. Well, and remember, they're using variables that are the cards that were dealt. These are all things that were in place before the general election campaign. That's all you need to know to get it correct this time around. I'm going to walk you through an alternative explanation that takes a look at campaign events. So I've told you, if you know the cards that have been dealt, that's the most important determinant. That's how I set up the poker analogy. But then there's the campaign events where you can kind of work at that around the margins. You can do better than expected or worse than expected. And so let's look at the campaign events. So there's a couple of stories that have been floating around in the last week as people try to make sense of the election outcome. One of them is, McCain was doing great until that Lehman Brothers collapse, and then people's 401ks vanished, and all of a sudden people say, we got to get rid of the incumbent administration, bring in this new guy talking about that change and hope. So the financial meltdown is supposedly one explanation. The second explanation is Sarah Palin, that people concluded she's just not up to the task. She crumbled under pressure from interviews and showed a lack of knowledge of national affairs, and people concluded, I don't want to take that chance of Sarah Palin as number 2. If John McCain, something were to happen to him, can I be confident that she could step in? So I've got a graph here of Obama's share of the two-party vote. So this is kind of comparable to what we saw before. This is taking out the third-party candidates. This comes from James Stimson, a well-respected political scientist at North Carolina. I just want to cite him as the source of data for accuracy here. Also, it turns out he was my dissertation advisor in graduate school. And if I don't cite him, I'm liable to see my degree revoked. So I'll attribute the data properly. And here's what he shows. This is his data. So I'm
So I
going to
just want to be clear. You're making the argument your advisor made just coincidentally.
It's his data, but my argument.
Okay.
I'm going to superimpose campaign events on his data.
Gotcha.
So let's take a look here. Oh, and by the way, we did a version of this on KUOW yesterday on weekday. And in the analysis that I'm about to present, I gave kind of the shortened version. David's reaction to it was that this was classic reductionist political science. Did I quote you correctly?
I think you did. Yeah.
And I don't think that's a fair characterization, because
Okay.
this is
It's not
actually
classic?
modern
It's not-
reductionist
okay.
political
Okay.
science.
Nice. Nice.
So
Nice.
I'll walk you through here, but I'll play along, I'll be game. Let's look at the campaign and see how each candidate reacted to various events and made their strategic moves and how it played out in the polls. Well, first thing let's note is that this starts on July 1st, and look at what's going on in July and August. This is before the conventions. So, Obama's up, Obama's down a little bit, but he's kind of fluctuating around 53. Here's 53. Clearly, that's the average during this period, before the conventions. He's averaging about 53. And by the way, this uses a measurement technique that combines a lot of different polls together. It's related to a family of techniques that are commonly used in the social sciences. We need not get into the technical details here, but one point to note is that polls that correlate more closely with the national trend count more, they're weighted more. If you have a poll that tends to zig when the other polls are zagging, it's kind of discounted because the assumption is something odd is going on with that poll. So there's some technical aspects to the measurement. But Obama's averaging 53 during this period. First campaign event, let's take a look at. Democratic Convention, beginning August 26th. Now, by most accounts, the Democrats had a successful convention. The Clintons made nice. Hillary Clinton had a famous moment where she called off the roll call vote and let's nominate Barack Obama by acclamation. And Biden gave a good speech. Obama gave a great speech, packed 70,000 into a stadium. People were on their feet, tons of excitement. A lot of favorable attention placed on the Democratic Convention. And lo and behold, look what happens. His poll numbers start going up after the convention begins. Okay, well, the campaign seems to matter, at least in the short term. Yikes. Let's not go there yet. Next event, Palin pick, August 29th. The day after the Democratic Convention, John McCain unveils his choice for VP. Now, I think that John McCain understood this cards analogy perfectly well, and that the Palin pick was a recognition that he wasn't holding no cards. You don't pick Sarah Palin if you think that you've got a good chance of winning right now. And I don't mean that as a derogatory claim necessarily, but just you go with someone safe. If you're doing pretty well, why not Tim Pawlenty? Good, solid, well-credentialed governor of Minnesota. That's who you go with. When you go with Sarah Palin, this is, in poker terms, the all-in play. You push all your chips in the middle. Or if you prefer the football analogy, it's the Hail Mary pass. I got no chance of winning. Here's my last chance. Let's go with her. And initially, it looks like it works pretty well. What happens after McCain unveils the Palin pick? Well, the polls start going down for Obama. And obviously, if they're going down for Obama, they're going up for McCain. So good news for McCain. Palin pick is working. Now we get to the Palin speech at the Republican National Convention on September 3rd. This speech drew millions of voters. It drew almost as many, just a hair beneath what Barack Obama drew for his acceptance speech and John McCain drew for his acceptance speech. So at this point, most Americans, all they knew about Sarah Palin was, hey, she's this new political star on the block, and she gave the speech. And if you watch the speech, I think most Americans, if you didn't know much about her, you couldn't come away anything other than impressed. Solid, nailed the lines, had a lot of humor, had grace, just came across really, really favorably. And that was indeed the country's initial reaction to her. But remember, all the people had was that speech. Because the McCain strategy, when they unveiled her, they knew that she lacked experience, and they were a little hesitant to put her out on the national stage. And their campaign was even asking, hey, why aren't you guys releasing her to talk to reporters? Like, that's normally what you do with your VP pick. And they said, we will not grant any interviews until the media will be, quote, respectful of her. McCain's team said that. And they stayed with that position for 8 days. During that 8 days, it was quite favorable to the McCain-Palin ticket, or as Palin sometimes would say, the Palin-McCain ticket. So McCain is growing in the polls. He's doing great. The Palin pick is working, at least if you buy into this campaign narrative. Eventually, I'm going to take this campaign narrative and toss it aside. But remember, I'm playing along for now. Now, one technical point I should mention about these data, it turns out that this is the trough of Obama support and also, therefore, the peak of McCain support. There are other compilations of polls, including at 538.com and at realclearpolitics.com, that show McCain with an actual lead at this stage. In Real Clear Politics, it's 2.9 points, so that would push these numbers. You see my scale goes down to 49. It would drop down to 48.5. That's where Obama would be at that point. So in other words, McCain is leading. 538 had us at about a 1-point McCain lead at that point, so thus Obama on this would be about 49.5, which means McCain's 50.5. So, and I talked to Stimson about this, and I said, how come this, there's a little difference here in the polls? And there's some technical details with how the measures are constructed in the particular polls that were done at that time and some characteristics of them. His take on it was, yeah, I think McCain probably did have a real lead at that point, but smaller than those polls were indicating. So for my purposes, the key point here is whether it's a lead or no lead, everyone agrees that this was the peak of John McCain's support. The trends are the same. The levels come out a little different according to which compilation you use, but the trends are the same. This is the best point for John McCain in the entire campaign. So I mentioned that they sheltered Sarah Palin for 8 days, and then they caved. Charles Gibson interview part 1, September 11th, as it turns out. Charles Gibson gave that interview, and this was, they did it in two, or they broadcast at least in 2 parts, I believe. This was the first part. By most accounts, it didn't go so well for Sarah Palin. This was where she said she had foreign policy experience because she's governor of Alaska, and Alaska's close to Russia. Gibson was not quite so sure that that was foreign policy experience. But also, he asked her about the Bush Doctrine, and her response was, in what respect, Charlie? And he had to kind of tell her what the Bush Doctrine was. A lot of people interpreted that to mean that she didn't really know what it was. Other people, like Charles Krauthammer, tried to say, well, she was actually more sophisticated than it appeared. But in any event, a lot of people started to have some doubts about Sarah Palin's qualifications for the presidency, which she would step into should John McCain die in office. What happens after the Gibson interview? Well, the data start moving toward Barack Obama. Now we get to the Lehman Brothers collapse and the beginnings of the financial meltdown. Now, the financial meltdown actually took a couple of weeks. There was a period of several days where no one knew what was quite going on. It actually took even more than a couple of weeks, more like a month. There were some fluctuations in the stock market, but this was before the real heavy tanking. So initially there was the AIG bailout and some stabilization that the Federal Reserve Board was doing, and it looked like that might kind of head off the crisis. But Obama's numbers are already trending up. They trend up some more now. Next major event, the Katie Couric interview, part 1. Couric had even more material than Gibson did, and she dribbled it out over several days. Couldn't resist. You've probably seen the clips. Can't name a Supreme Court decision other than Roe v. Wade that she opposes. Can't name magazines and newspapers that she reads regularly. More bridge to nowhere stuff. A question about the bailout, which she then seemed to answer in terms of healthcare and trade, and didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. So by virtually all accounts, and in fact the campaign itself even said this interview didn't go so well. So the numbers keep going in Obama's direction. Next day, McCain suspends his campaign, says, I will not participate in that debate that's scheduled for tomorrow until we have a bailout in place. Well, the next day we had a debate, and he was there. And this is the period of the debates from September 26th to October the 15th. So you can see they're bracketed in here. The polls are basically flat during that period. So Obama had already made up his ground, and polls done right after the debates, every single one of them showed a large lead in the focus groups and in the random sample polls that Obama did better, Biden did better, but that didn't seem to register in the polls on who you're going to vote for. But here's going to be my main point, all right? So there's a lot of stability in July and August. Then we get some funny business here in the middle, in the end of August and the beginning of September. Then after all the funny business is over, we have more stability in October, and that carries through to November. Interestingly, Stimson's final point prediction is 53.9, and again, remember the actual result is 53.4. So the polls were accurate this time. 538.com, Real Clear Politics, all the compilations of polls were accurate at the end. So this October stability, I think, is real. So my point about the campaign is, a lot of people said, oh, well, the Sarah Palin, killed McCain's support because, as Professor Domke said, he won the base but lost everyone else. All right, that kind of makes sense. The financial meltdown helped Barack Obama because people said, oh, the Republicans are in charge, they can't manage the economy, maybe we need somebody new. All right, that kind of makes sense. And McCain looked erratic, he's bouncing around, suspending the campaign, unsuspending the campaign. Meanwhile, Barack Obama is calm, cool, and collected. He seemed to project a very presidential image while McCain was running around looking like a crazy man. So, all right, I'm with you for all that. Put that all together, it's worth 1 point. From July and August, from before the funny business starts until after the funny business ends, we're 1 point higher because in October, Obama's averaging about 54. And remember, he comes in at a touch under 54. So from July to August, he's at about 53. Then we have all these campaign events, which seem to benefit Obama. And yet, in the aggregate, he only adds 1 percentage point. So the Palin pick, I think by anybody's account, starts out great, then it utterly collapses. Most people seem to think that the financial the financial meltdown helps Obama. There's an article in Time this week that makes all kinds of attributions about voters' intent and says, oh, well, the financial meltdown did it. Okay, maybe it helped him. But put all these things together, it's 1 point from where Obama was before there even was a Sarah Palin on the national stage. So before she had a chance to collapse under the light of scrutiny from interviews and other information coming out. So I conclude from this that this race was really pretty stable throughout the campaign, and yeah, there was a lot of change here. And you could argue that if Palin, stop it.
If that's just a little bug I built in there for you, okay?
I'm not surprised. That if, I won't use the mouse anymore, but you can see the trough for Obama. Maybe you could construct a scenario by which McCain stays there. And remember that in some polls he has an actual lead there. What would that case be? Well, if Palin really was what everyone thought when they watched her initial speech. Hockey mom, 5 kids, reformer in Alaska, cleaned up a corrupt government, took on her own party, killed the bridge to nowhere. Hey, what's not to like? That's a pretty good profile. That's what most people would have believed from watching the speech. But as more information came in, well, she actually supported the bridge to nowhere before she opposed it, didn't seem to have a lot of experience, didn't seem to have knowledge of national affairs, et cetera. That evaporates. So yes, if she was the perfect candidate, I will grant, maybe McCain maintains that support. But there is no such candidate. Anyone who's in national politics has warts. If you don't have warts before you started, your opponents will uncover them for you. Ronald Reagan had warts. Bill Clinton had warts. It's part of the business. So if you're going to pull someone onto the national stage who's not already there, you might have a positive rollout, but anybody who's in politics, there's enough stuff that their opponents can dig into and put forward that will cast negative light on that person. And I will admit Sarah Palin had more of that available than other candidates might. But that would, I think, be true for just about any candidate. There is no perfect VP pick.
So the reason I sat back down is because you started to answer the question. Your assumption then in this trough moment is, I just want to be clear, your assumption is that the trough moment would not have stayed, that Sarah Palin, that the moment would not have continued, because if you move it down to the other polls, down to 49% for Barack Obama,
right.
Your assumption here is that trough would not have remained, that somehow things were going to come out about Palin. That's the assumption you've got here. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the assumption. And that it was already coming up before the financial meltdown. So if there are people saying, well, it was all a financial meltdown, well, look, it's already coming up after the Gibson interview.
No, I don't think it was all the financial meltdown. I think this fits my argument perfectly. I think it's that originally Sarah Palin drove the base towards her, but then when she wasn't substantive, people began to say that's a nakedly partisan religious pick. And so I'm sorry, John McCain, you didn't put country first. And they began to move towards McCain, towards Obama. Then the economy comes in and seals it. So I'm just wondering, is that what you're essentially arguing, that they were moving for other reasons, Palin-esque reasons, right?
Yeah, they were moving for Palin-esque reasons before the financial meltdown. Maybe the financial meltdown solidifies that. So I'm with you up to this point, but my claim would be add that all together and it's 1 point.
Okay.
From where Obama was before there was a Sarah Palin on the national stage.
I won't keep going on. This is your talk, but I just want to it's 1 point in the aggregate.
Yes.
Right? But it's 5 points in that span of time. If you go from 54 to 49, what the other polls say, right? So it's 5 points in that span of time, which is enough to win an election.
From the artificial peak for McCain, where the reason...
Why is it artificial?
Because the reason it was there was no one knew anything about Sarah Palin. All they had was hockey mom, killed bridge to nowhere, gave a great speech, energetic, youthful, vigorous. If you just watch the speech, how can you not like her? But it's unrealistic that could be sustained.
Okay, all right. I want to go back to this later, but I need the computer for it, so I'll hold my rest.
Okay.
Thanks.
We will continue. So that's my claim that the campaign events kind of cancel out. Now, I think part of what's going on here is that at the presidential level, it's actually the hardest place for the campaign to drive the results because it tends to be a high information election. People are already very knowledgeable about the candidates. They both tend to be well financed. They have enough money to get their ads out. And so there's actually less room for campaign events and the candidates' responses to them, their messages, to make a difference than, say, at races lower on the ticket. Races lower in the ticket where people don't know as much, you can actually do a Sarah Palin rollout kind of thing and have less likelihood that the negative stuff comes out, but not at the presidential level. So my conclusion from all this is the campaign mattered along the way, but it kind of cancels out and we end up with Obama 1 point higher than he was before it all started. Another metric that we might use to look at how well candidates do would be the House of Representatives. And I want to use this to try to show, did Obama run a brilliant campaign? That's certainly the conventional wisdom. And if you talk to Democrats 4 years ago, they said, we lost. John Kerry ran an incompetent campaign. Well, is that true? I think that what happens is people attribute a brilliant campaign when you win. Well, that was a brilliant campaign. When you lose, it was an incompetent campaign. So it's a circular argument. So I look here at the House of Representatives as kind of a control group, if you will. So how well does the party do across the entire country for these House races that are stripped of the national profile that we get for president? Go back. So in 92 and 96, you see Democrats are doing pretty well, 52 and 50. They drop off in 2000, 2004. Then they're back up in 2008. Okay? So 2008 is the best year among those five. Now how about for president? Well, they're doing pretty well in 92 and 96. Then they are bottoming out in 2000, 2004. They're back up in 2008. What does this tell us? Well, the left side table looks a lot like the right side table. When Democrats are doing well at the House level, they're also doing well at the presidential level, and vice versa. That tells us, in turn, there's something more fundamental driving this, which brings us back to the hand you're dealt, the state of the economy, how a referendum on the incumbent administration, which itself takes into account a lot of information, negative reaction to the war in Iraq, leadership crisis, all of those things. So the presidential approval rating is not just one thing. It actually incorporates a lot of things into it. And that also influences how many partisans there are in the electorate. I mean, the reason we have more Democrats now than we did 4 years ago is in part a referendum on the performance of the incumbent president. So these two numbers track each other. Votes for Democrats for the House and votes for the president. But because we have a measure of how well the Democrats are doing for the House, we can come up with a standard for how, quote, brilliant a campaign a candidate ran. So let's take a look at the president relative to the House, the Democratic president, that is. You can see that the numbers are always close, but in 92, 96, 2000, 2004, they're all positive. In other words, the Democratic candidate for president is doing better than all the Democratic candidates for House added together. The only one of the five who does worse is Barack Obama. Now remember, they're all close, and he does 0.9% worse. So it's not like, the Democrats racked up huge margins in Congress and he got clobbered. No, he's 0.9% lagging behind the House Democrats, but he is behind. Note John Kerry's numbers. He does better than the House Democrats by a tiny 0.1%, but the conventional wisdom is he ran an incompetent campaign. Barack Obama ran a brilliant campaign. Well, before I'd want to believe those claims, I would want to see some more evidence of it. I mean, I don't accept evidence that Obama won, therefore he ran a brilliant campaign. I want more than that. I want to know how well did Obama play his cards. If we want to have an argument that he was dealt a good hand and he played it well, all right, fine, now I'm with you. But just the notion that he won and therefore he ran a brilliant campaign, I'm not so sure about. And same thing for Kerry. The notion that Kerry ran an incompetent campaign because he lost, well, it wasn't a very favorable environment for Democrats. So maybe he actually did pretty well compared to what he might have done. Having put this up, I should note a couple caveats with my data. The data aren't quite as good as I'd like because if I had a lot of time to do this, maybe Provost Wise could grant me a research assistant next quarter or something so I can get a little help. But there's some problems with the House data. It includes races where there was no, where one party didn't mount a candidate. So you want to separate them out and kind of clean up the data in some ways. You could basically do a better job than what I'm doing here. So this is a first cut. Like a lot of social science, you do a first approximation, and then when you get research funding or something else, you do a better analysis later. So I wouldn't want to necessarily go to the grave with this data, but I think it's at least framing the issue the way I would want to see it framed, which is how well does the presidential candidate play his cards, or sometime her cards. And that's the standard by which I would evaluate things. So I've got some material on race, but in light of time, I'm going to defer to either David if he wants to jump in right now.
Mark and I talked a little bit before we started, and I asked him if I might have the floor to tell a story to close. It's a story about a couple of our students. Because when you come to a provost lecture, it's nice to hear some of the faculty talk a little bit about the things they think and to show you data, but it's also really helpful to get a sense of the humanity behind some of these stories, to get a sense of some of the students that go to a place like the University of Washington. I want to tell you a couple quick stories here to wrap it up, because this really says more to me about this election than any of the data that we've presented tonight. There's a student who's here tonight named Laura Mansfield. Laura took a class that I taught last winter. Started in January. It was a class on blogging in the presidential election. We were going to cover the caucuses in this state. It's going to be a grand moment. We were just hoping the election would still be close when it came to caucuses. Laura wasn't sure about taking that class. Wasn't sure that she had the knowledge or the energy or the enthusiasm for politics, and I talked to her long and hard about doing that. She said, I'll stay in. I'll give it a shot. We had several conversations. Over the course of that quarter, she moved from wondering if she had the energy and the enthusiasm and interest in politics and for that matter, partly in journalism, to being one of our lead reporters when we went to Idaho to cover caucuses, to being one of our lead reporters in this state when we covered the caucuses, to being one of our lead reporters when we went to Texas to cover the primaries there, to being one of two people I sent to Pennsylvania for 5 days to cover the primaries there on some money that this university provided for the students. She was one of the three we sent to Indiana to cover the primaries there. Where was this? This was all online. Thousands of people were reading our material. The Huffington Post, the most read newspaper online, almost 5 million page views a day, wanted our stuff. Laura was part of that. On election night, she was working for the Seattle Times. Come back to the election night in a moment. After we were done with the primary, she kept sending me emails saying, I'm ready to go to Denver for the convention. I'm ready to go to St. Paul for the convention. I've got family in Michigan. I got family in Virginia. I got family in Florida. Well, we didn't have the money, but that's the kind of transformation that happened with Laura. On election night, she was working for the Seattle Times and used her little flip camera to provide a video of what happened on Capitol Hill. Posted around the internet from the Seattle Times. That's one of our students. That's one of our students who a year ago would never, ever have imagined the kind of engagement she had. Another student we had, is a student by the name of Will Mari. Will is going to be the next great political reporter in this state. Will was also in this group. Will went with us to Idaho. Will went with us to Texas. Will went to Indiana as well. Will worked for the Seattle Times over the summer for their editorial page. Will worked for the Seattle Times over the course of the summer. I could say so many positive things about Will. He's one of the smartest students I've ever had. He's one of the hardest working students I've ever had. I'll just end this about Will by saying that he's one of 3 students that the University of Washington now has who's a candidate for a Rhodes Scholarship. Okay? Will Murray. And I have one more student, because I'm just so proud of these people. A student by the name of Devin Hampton I had in class. I have, by the way, permission to tell all of these stories. I've talked to the students and just want to make sure you know that. I had Devin Hampton in class about 4 years ago. Devin was a friend of another former student of mine named Phil. Phil was off getting his PhD at Stanford, had been his BA and MA here. Phil called me up when Devin enrolled in the class and said, would you do me a favor and just keep an eye on Devin? Devin's a good guy, he's smart, but he's making some bad choices in life. I said, I'll do what I can. I met with Devin, had several conversations with him, but Devin wasn't interested. Really wasn't interested in school, wasn't interested in much of anything I had to say. I didn't see him much of the quarter, barely passed the class, didn't see him again for a long, long time. I figured, Devin, this happens with students. They've got other things in the world, and sometimes those aren't the best choices. Phil, this guy at Stanford, who's I'm very close with, former student, graduated with his PhD last year, and his advisor was going to be gone at the graduation, so he called me up and said, would you come down to my graduation and would you put the hood on me? Very important moment for a PhD. I was, of course, moved. I said, I'll do that for sure. I came down, and Phil, being the kind of guy that he is, he invited everybody he knows to his graduation, which included Devin. He stayed in touch with Devin. He invited Devin. I went down there, and Devin was there. Devin turned his life around. He was en route to turning his life around, making some great choices now. Sharp guy. I could see the intellect. I could see the wheels turning. I could see that this guy was going to be something special. Devin and I shared a taxi ride back to the airport. This was down in Palo Alto. On the way back, Devin said, I want to get involved in politics. There's a guy who comes into the bar that I work in. I'm thinking of working on his campaign for city council. You know anything about this guy? So what's the guy's name? Tim Burgess. I said, you know, I know Tim. He's a good guy. If you got a chance to work on his campaign, you should do it. Devin said, he's not going to pay me. I said, who cares? You should work on his campaign. But I said, Devin, why don't you come do an internship with me? Because I wanted to keep my eye on him. Wanted to spend some time with him. Do an internship with me, work for Tim. We'll see how it goes. He did that all the way through fall last year. Tim wins the city council race. Tim, to his everlasting credit, Tim, to your everlasting credit, when that was over, invited Devin to come work in his office in the city council. Said, I can't pay you, but I can give you a desk. I can give you a phone. I'll give you an opportunity. Devin came to me and said, what do you think? I said, hell yeah, you do this. Heck yeah. So he did it. And I said, let's do another internship. I'll keep supervising it. We'll keep meeting. Devin's doing great. We get into 2008 now. Tim's working the city council. Devin starts to make some pals around City Hall. He's an up-and-comer. The Gregoire campaign comes along and says, we'd like you to work for us. Devin says to me, I don't know. I'm pretty loyal to Tim. He gave me my shot. What do you think I should do? I said, you should go work for the Gregoire campaign, okay? He went to go work. He went back to Tim, and Tim, to his credit again, said, you should go work for the Gregoire campaign. Devin did. Well, you know, it turns out in Washington that many of the Gregoire campaign is the Obama campaign, same people. So Devin's great hope was to work on the Obama campaign. Started working that, started talking to them, got a shot here or there, started to do an event or two, got a chance. They came to him and said, we want you to be one of our 40 advanced people around the country who set up events around the country. We want you to do it. He went to me and said, well, the Gregoire campaign, what do you think I should do? I said, you should take this job, okay? So he took the job. Became one of the 40 or so advanced people around this country working for Barack Obama, presidential campaign. He was the one of the 2 or 3 people who ran the advance for the first event with Hillary Clinton, the Unity New Hampshire event. He ran the event when Joe Biden came here to Tacoma a few weeks ago. Afterwards, Biden pulled Devin aside and said, that was the best event I've ever done. This is one of our students. We're not done yet, though. Because Devin was asked by the Obama campaign to spend election night with the Obamas. Not the only person. Lots of staff were there. But he was asked to come to do a series of things that Barack might do that night that they needed setups for. He was privileged to be there, of course. So he went. The election was going so well that evening, as I've been told by Devin, as I've been told by you, that midway through the evening they said, we've got something for you to work on. So we're not going to hang out with Barack and Michelle and all this. We're going to give you something to work on. Turns out that it was going to be the first public event of President-elect Barack Obama's life that they wanted him to work on, the press conference. They said, we want you and one other person to handle this. Well, the other guy got called off to something else. So this guy, Devin Hampton, who a year and a half later was nowhere involved in politics, wasn't even in college, was now doing the first event of Barack Obama's presidential life, the press conference that he held on Friday. But while he was preparing for that on election night, all of the staff workers were called together and said, we're going to Grant Park now. Come on. And so he ran downstairs to get into the motorcade. And they got in the motorcade and they drove through the streets of Chicago. And he tells this story and it kills me. The streets are quiet going through the streets of Chicago, and as they drive by, all the Chicago police are saluting Barack Obama as he goes by. Think of the symbolism of that on race in America. Think about that. And they went down to Lakeshore Drive, and they went around the corner and came into Grant Park, where 40 years ago this country exploded over the anti-war riots. This country divided. And they came around the corner at Lakeshore Drive, and the 200,000 people at Grant Park saw the motorcade and rushed to be next to them. And they made their way forward to the stage, and Obama and the rest of the Obamas went over here, and Devin went over here, and he got to watch that speech from the side of the stage. That's just one of the stories of the students who go to the University of Washington. He didn't go to there this past quarter, just in case you're wondering. He took his quarter off. But these are the kinds of students we have here. These are the kinds of experiences we live for here for our students. In 1960, we looked at the electoral map in the election and said, it's a passing of the torch. I know my students. I know them well. I've worked with them. I've gone to Texas. I've been in the hospital in Texas, and they've run the show without me. That's another story. And I just want to tell you from the front lines, to use a 60s line, that the kids are all right. They are. They're going to be all right. Thank you.